everybody, and welcome back to the Sunday Shot. It's great to have you with us on this Sunday morning. I am back on Gadigal land, the land of the mighty Eora Nation. Very pleased to be here. I am joined, as ever, by my co-host and editor of the Sunday Shot. Oh, no, I'm not. Yes, I am. Dave Milner.
Yeah.
I am.
Oh,
Sorry about that. I just was getting a
yeah.
little weird thing from Riverside. Hello, Dave. How you going?
I am overwhelmed by the clusterfuckery we are all swamped with at the moment, but managing. How are you?
Yeah. I would say probably the same. Yeah, a lot going on, none of it particularly edifying. We are very pleased to have back with us today a very good friend of the Sunday Shot, Greg Jericho from the Australia Institute. Hi, Greg. How you going?
Hello, Joe and Dave. Great to be here.
Always good to have you with us. And making her debut with us on the Sunday Shot this week is Jana Favero. Jana, thank you for coming and joining us on the Sunday Shot. Jana is with the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you for having me. It's great to be here for the first time.
So a lot been going on, as we've discussed. We are today going to have a bit of a chat about the bogey subject for Australian politics, which is immigration. Now, I'm going to say that up front because in many ways, having a conversation about immigration seems to be allowing the coalition to, and indeed Pauline Hanson potentially, to set the political agenda, which is ridiculous given what a minority of Australian people and views they represent. But I thought, and we can have some conversation about this, it would be good to just have a show which lays the factual framework for the immigration debate just to demonstrate how far away Australian political media discourse has drifted from those facts. So that's my justification for it.
No, I think sticking with facts and exploring those is a very good thing to do. I would also just voice some concerns at the start of the show as well, that I do consider this conversation largely, regardless of any of the merits of needing to meet infrastructure needs for a population, that is a real conversation. But in this country, most often this conversation is a veil for venting our racism. And I think that's unequivocally what's happening here right now. I also just want to state quickly that I do think we should do this. We should get out of the way, but we are playing into the hands of these people ever so slightly, because when the establishment is pressed and the people are angry, which is clearly what's happening right now, that dissent can be funneled in a few different directions. And right-wing politicians want people to blame immigrants instead of the hyper-wealthy. That's the basic equation that's at play here.
Yeah, and I think that is what is going on in right-wing politics. So I thought if we have a conversation that shows how ludicrous that is, that might be useful moving forward. Before we get into all of that, just a quick roundup of the week that's been. The coalition announced their front bench. Lots of people that no one's ever heard of, really. But the few people that we had heard of, there was hilarity ensued as everybody understood that little Timmy Wilson is now going to be the shadow treasurer and kind of pop up on our screens far more than anybody wants him to. Greg, is Timmy Wilson a qualified candidate for the role that he's been asked to assume by Angus Taylor?
Well, certainly in his own mind, he is.
Does that count though?
Perhaps the biggest fig jam in all of Parliament, which is saying something. Look, it took him less than a day to trip over his ego when he started flying kites about the Reserve Bank perhaps giving up the full employment mandate and just concentrating on inflation. That was seized on pretty quickly. I think what we're going to find with Wilson is a lot of these things where he thinks he can sort of, if he comes out with something, he'll turn the debate in the way that he wants. and a lot of it will be around him actually saying things that are quite ludicrous. One of the perhaps the most annoying thing about the whole coalition front bench is the reporting of it is always so incredibly lame in this sense of, oh, Tim Wilson, he's a good performer with runs on the board. And they'll always refer to, oh, he did well um, in the franking
Franking
credits
credits, yeah.
debate in 2019. And of course, they just say, journalists will say that, oh, he did well, he fought a good fight. And they're like, yeah, he lied his ass off.
Yeah.
He abused the economics committee system to basically run a partisan campaign. He absolutely sowed fear, made it seem like every pensioner gets a franking credit check every fortnight. It was just a disgraceful campaign. And yet journalists just slide back into that comfort of, oh, well, forget policy, forget that. Let's just talk politics. Oh, he's a good performer. And it's that type of easy ride which he, I think, lives for. But one of the things with becoming shadow treasurer, it does give you that more focus. The government starts caring about you more. And one of the unfortunate things for Tim Wilson, he's had a long career and he has said a lot of stupid things throughout that long career, and they're all going to be reminded and brought back. And good thing too, because I'm not sure if his ability matches his belief in his ability. But Chalmers is
True.
certainly going to want to stomp on it, if only because the media are going to give him this ride of good performer and future leader. That's the thing they love. They love a future leader. There's no one else in the Liberal Party of any worth, that you wouldn't even want to stick in front of a camera and let them talk. So the stocks are pretty bare. So they want to find someone so they can pretend to have some sort of balance.
Greg,
Well,
why do you think the media reports on our politics in this way, where we're sort of judging the pantomime rather than the substance of what happens to Australians at the end of these policies? Is it just laziness?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's um, if you're going to churn out a commentary piece, it's much easier to talk about things like that, like good performer. He presents well. He speaks well to big business or whatever. The whole thing with Barnaby of a good retail
retail
politician, all this crap.
politician, oh my
It,
God.
it's it's so much easier to do that than actually have to talk about a policy, because then you actually have to read some documents and do some
Mm.
research and actually support your assertions with evidence. Whereas it's much easier if you can just write things like, Tim Wilson has a face that will present well to a side of the electorate that the Liberal Party desperately needs to win back. Now, I can write that without any care of actually whether it's true or not, but it kind of sounds true. And that's what the press gallery really love being able to churn out. I've always said, and this goes back to even when I was sort of back in my blogging days, the writing political commentary is the easiest thing in the entire world. It really is easy. Writing good political commentary is very hard. Very few people do it, and unfortunately, it's probably not even all that valued by editors who just won't give us some
Mm.
color, give us some crap, and that's what they put out.
So joining Tim Wilson in the economic portfolios is Claire Chandler, Senator from Tasmania, who I think is best known to date, certainly to the broader population, of her advocacy to keep trans women out of sport. And for those of us in the arts industry, she was the trigger for the whole Khaleb Sabsabi debacle that trashed the reputation of Creative Australia when they temporarily dumped him from going to the Venice Biennale. So that will be interesting. Do you have any sense of her as a financial, you know,
No, I mean,
commentator,
everything you
policymaker?
just said there is why she is in the role that she is. She's a culture warrior. The Liberals are going to say all the faults of everything, such that there are faults when you've got unemployment at 4.1%, but all the faults of the economy is we got too much government spending, And so they've got someone in who will love finding government waste on woke
Mm,
projects and things like that. And so, yeah, we're going to see kind of a Doge kind of campaign without being explicit. Peter Dutton tried it, but was stupid enough to actually say that's what he was going to do. Claire won't sort of do that, but it is what, you can see her looking at research grants and things like that and going, oh, how are we funding these type of things that are clearly, left-wing vanity projects and,
yeah,
all that kind of stuff. And, why are we wasting money on the NDIS when, you know, it's being abused by people who just need to, you know, stiffen up and, show
yeah.
some fortitude and things
Not
like
be
that. So
autistic
that's what
anymore.
I kind of expect from her. And Tim Wilson, he'll just go after unions, look to cut taxes everywhere he can. To basically, his entire game is feathering the nests of the high wealth and high income and big business,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
that's what we're
that
going to
will
see.
be their front bench. Certainly,
Yeah,
of the Doge project, Claire Chandler will have the support of Jacinta Nappinjimpa-Price, who's back on the front bench, along with Andrew Hastie and Sarah Henderson, and all of the Nats who had been sent to Coventry by Susan Lee. So everyone's back. They're joined by a lot of unknowns. We'll wait and see.
it just sounds
Another,
like the
sorry, Jane.
inevitability of the conversation somehow getting even dumber is upon us. And it's staggering that we're gonna find new depths, and I just really think we will. Like, the next yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the other things that happened this week was Anthony Albanese. Like, if you shut your eyes, it could have been Scott Morrison who uttered the words that he only had contempt for the Australian women and children who are at the moment marooned in Syria when they tried to make their way back to Australia. Jana, the so-called ISIS brides, there's 11 women, there's 13 children. They did have valid Australian travel documents. It's still sort of some confusion as to whether they were single use or from whence they came, but the government has certainly not denied that they had valid documents, but they weren't able to make their way through Syria. So they're back in the Al Roj camp, which will soon be closed down. So something is going to give here soon.
It's just really curious why this is making so many big headlines at the moment is something that I want to comment on first. It's been an issue and saga that's been going for a number of years. Not a lot is known about each of those women, but they are Australian citizens. So when we're talking about issuing of documents, they're asking for passports.
Yeah.
So they're Australian citizens who are trying to enter back into Australia, and you've got quite a number of children, many who were born in Australia. And so a lot of the commentary is actually putting aside, the ISIS brides or all that terminology, do Australian citizens have the right to come back to Australia? I think is a
Mm.
bigger and broader question here. And why is this group being targeted now and being spoken about so much? I think it again is playing into some of the racist rhetoric. I mean, there are a lot of Australians who do commit crimes overseas. They come back to Australia. There's been, with a lot of these women, there have been interviews over the years saying that they didn't know what they were getting into. They were fearful for their children. Were they coerced? I mean, children can't be held responsible for their parents' decisions as well. So there's a lot more nuance here. And at the moment, we're not seeing any of that nuance being reported. It is like, look at these evil women. I think even I saw Tanya Plibersek come out today saying that what they did to their children was resulting in child abuse. I mean, you've got Save the Children on the other hand, the international NGO who represents the rights of the child, saying the children have a right to come home. So it's very much one-sided reporting. It's inflammatory language. And again, it's about our border control and demonizing certain people. Now, I don't know enough about what these women may or may not have done, but they are Australian citizens with Australian citizen children.
It's interesting as well that we've recently learnt that there are more than 500 Australian Israeli dual nationals in this country that have served for the IDF, and they are not getting any sort of media attention calling for them to be kicked out. It stands in stark contrast with this case.
Yeah, and so many people are saying to me, "What about the eyes as brides?" And first of all, I say, "Look, I'm specialise in asylum and refugee policy, which is slightly different to
Yes.
this, but it's become, a mainstream issue that has been created by politicians again." It goes to that earlier point about talking about the politics of it rather than the policies, or what this means is, here, travel documents weren't issued thinking that they were visitors or they're trying to get back into Australia. They're Australian citizens.
Yeah. Well, they are Australian citizens, and the way that the Australian government is behaving is in stark contrast to the way that some of our allies are now behaving. Because, as I said, the camp is going to be closed down, so these women and children are going to have to go somewhere. And we've seen, the French, a whole range of other European countries, actually, Canada, working with the camp officials to repatriate their citizens, and yet we're just, again, doing this kind of, we'll look away, we'll pretend it's not happening, and then there'll be some kind of default chaotic response, that will come into play.
Yeah, and
Yeah, and
to that.
it's what
Oh, sorry.
people. No, you go ahead.
No,
No, I was just gonna say, I don't think in households, people's biggest worry are the eyes as brides at the moment.
No.
People are worried about cost of living, they're worried about the environment, they're despairing, as you said, Dave, with everything that's happening globally, and again, it's just another distraction in another way.
and
Greg.
just on that, I mean, if this is our biggest security risk, then we're doing pretty well because it's 11 women and their kids who are apparently the biggest threat to our national security. I mean, if they are actually a threat to our national security, it's a pretty easy one to manage that risk. Bring them home, ensure the kids are not being indoctrinated in which we know occurs in these places because any important harbour almost you've got people spouting pretty violent ideology, and if they're the only voices being heard, well, they're going to follow it. So get them out of there, bring them home, and also I'm pretty sure our police could actually will know who these people are. So if they are a risk, they're fairly easy to keep an eye on them. So I don't know what the whole national security argument is. And also in the same press conference where Anthony Albanese is saying, "Oh, it's the mother's responsibility. They were the ones who did this." He was boasting about the numbers of social media accounts that have been banned, which is happening because apparently parents actually can't be responsible for what their kids do, so the government needs to step in. So it's I
Yeah.
know it's stupid to ask for some logic on this issue, but just the whole fact they're called ISIS brides is
I
just
know.
gross as all hell.
Even at a paragraph
Yeah,
headline, ISIS brides, there's so many connotations that just
yeah,
trigger fear response in white people.
it
Mm.
really is, and, it was something that last year, there was a bit of talk about this, and it all kind of died down, and then suddenly she's back,
Well, I
and
think because actually we did repatriate some,
yeah,
women and
and life
children,
went
and
on. Yeah.
yeah, life went on. One of them, one of the women did face minor charges only, but was not, there was no custodial sentence, that was required by the severity or not, as the case may be, of those, particular charges, and the other one was charged with nothing. It has
Yeah.
been documented that the Australian government has known about the identities and the status and the activities of this particular cohort for many years because they've been stuck in that camp for many years now, and the AFP and ASIO have thoroughly investigated them. And as a result of that investigation only now, there was one,
Mm,
temporary exclusion order that was issued on one of the women. And to your point, Jana, temporary exclusion orders do seem to violate that fundamental and inalienable right of Australian citizens or any citizens of a country to return to their homeland.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also, on the one hand, you've got all this screaming that we've lost control of our borders, we need to secure our borders, but there are powers that can stop Australian citizens returning home. So it's very selective commentary again. It's for political purposes. It's hard not to be cynical and thinking why this is all coming up now and why there's this commentary and sort of chest beating. And what it takes for a country to block a citizen coming in. As Greg said, if there have been any laws broken, as soon as any of them arrive here, they could be arrested and dealt with the criminal justice system. Punishment is being given to people without then a fair process, and it just plays into the rhetoric we're hearing. But I did find it quite ironic of all this talk about the borders when we're trying to stop people who are Australian citizens and have the powers to stop them from coming into Australia.
Yeah, and look, that hasn't been tested in the High Court yet. It seems that these exclusion orders are ripe for such a challenge because whilst they're only for 2 years, and there's actually some detail about you can have one issued and then you can apply for a return permit, but we won't get into the weeds there. Suffice to say that even though they do have limits on them of 12 months for a return permit session and 24 months for the exclusion order itself, you can actually apply in a rolling way for these orders so that effectively people can be kept out indefinitely. So we'll wait and see. We're going to have Anne Toomey on the show soon, and we've got a whole list of particular issues that we're going to get her commentary on as to whether or not they're in fact constitutionally valid. To move to the broader conversation about immigration, we're going to first hear from Abul Rizvi, just to set the scene of the factual framework of what our immigration program comprises, the different visa categories, the sorts of numbers that we've seen, the false reporting of numbers that we've seen, and then we'll come back and we'll get into the conversation, which may well include why we're even having this conversation. So there's been lots of chatter about the appropriate level of net overseas migration in recent weeks. Too high, we're told. It's coming in at numbers that we don't need, we don't want, we can't sustain. Can you start by giving us an overview of how the current levels of migration fit into the overall population targets that the government and the opposition have?
So neither the coalition nor the government nor One Nation have a population target. None of them have a population plan. They don't have a plan for managing net overseas migration. None of them. I think we should start with that understanding. There is no plan.
So when they say it's too high, it's not too high relative to a target. It's just amorphously too high.
Yes. And included in that is massive misunderstanding about what the current level of net migration is. Jane Hume just very recently, I think within the last 24 hours, said immigration, and she didn't define what she meant, immigration is too high at 500,000 per annum. Well, there is no measure of immigration that currently is 500,000 per annum. It did get to over 500,000 net overseas migration in 22-23. But she seems to forget whose policy settings drove that. They were coalition policy settings, which were at the time desperately trying to satisfy business groups who wanted a massive boost in labour supply because they were crying about labour shortages. Indeed, in September 2022, so that's 3 months into the relevant financial year, Peter Dutton says immigration has to be increased, but I doubt Labor can do it.
So
6 months later, he said, it's all out of control. How did this happen? Well, it happened because of the policy settings you put in place.
So there do seem to be all sorts of contradictions in the way that particularly the coalition talk about immigration. Can we just start by talking about what the immigration numbers comprise?
There are two main measures that people talk about. One is net overseas migration, which is the movement of people, irrespective of citizenship, irrespective of visa.
Yep.
It's the movement of people into Australia who have been out of Australia for more than 12 months out of 16, who come into Australia and stay in Australia for more than 12 months out of 16. That is a net migration arrival.
Yep.
People who leave Australia, having stayed here for more than 12 months out of 16, and stay out of the country for more than 12 months out of 16, is a net migration departure. The difference between those two numbers is net migration.
So if you want to impact that, then you have to be cutting either your permanent migration program, the number of international students coming in, the number of temporary skilled workers, which of course the coalition never wants to do, And then there's the New Zealand citizens and Australian citizens, but they're sort of both special cases. So I guess we won't talk about them to any great
And one other
degree.
big one here is working holiday makers.
Working holiday makers, indeed.
Working holiday makers were the second biggest driver of the boom in 22-23. And I don't think anyone would refute the argument that the coalition made changes to working holiday maker visas that expanded them dramatically.
And that was at the behest of business as a rule.
A combination of business, a combination of Mr. Morrison having a meeting with Boris Johnson.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
That helped.
Yep.
So Brits are very special in our working holiday maker program now. They're the only ones who get an automatic 3-year working holiday maker visa, not a single year. And they're the only ones who have an age limit of 35, not 30.
But when we hear all of the chatter about, we need to reduce migration, it doesn't seem to be working holiday visas that people are targeting. It's much more likely to be students, generally international students, and permanent migration.
If you cut permanent migration, you probably wouldn't have a huge impact on net migration.
Right.
Because the bulk of our permanent program comes from people already here. They've already been counted in net overseas migration. So giving them a permanent residence visa doesn't actually change the net overseas migration number.
Okay.
So the big contributors to net overseas migration are absolutely right. 1, students.
Yep.
2, working holiday makers. 3, skilled temporary entrants. New Zealand citizens. Permanent migration.
So you have described there being sort of 2 ways of approaching, 2 frameworks of approaching migration, which is sort of a top-down, which is where governments are looking kind of broadly at issues impacting on Australia generally and how migration might feed into that, and then bottom-up, which is getting into the granular level of detail about particular visa classes. So I'd like to just focus on the big one first up, if we can, in the top-down approach, and that is demography. That it is actually important for Australia to be importing new people, if you like, to deal with what is one of our other big political issues, which is our ageing population. Can you talk about how that how migration impacts on the age of our population?
So essentially, the level of net overseas migration affects two big demographic things. One is the rate at which we age, and we're going to age. Net overseas migration won't stop it. What net overseas migration does is slow it down. And it's a judgment to be made as to how much and how fast you want to slow the aging down. The higher the level of net migration, the more you slow it down. The lower the level of net migration, the less you slow it down. The other impact it has is the point in time in Australia that deaths exceed births. At some point in the future, deaths will exceed births, but not yet. And it probably won't be until the end of this century if net overseas migration is maintained at around 200 or so thousand.
Yeah.
But if you bring it back to zero, deaths will exceed births much more quickly.
Clearly, the implications of that happening, of our ongoing ageing population, is something that governments have said that they do need to tackle as a policy priority, because we're not going to then have enough taxpayers to sustain people's standard of living as they get older, and we're not going to have enough new employees coming into the service industries to look after our ageing population.
Yes, quite right, quite right. Which comes to, I think, the final point that I should be making here is that if that is the crucial policy issue for the long term, why don't we have a plan to explain that and explain what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it?
Even considering some of the other top-down issues that governments have to deal with, like environmental sustainability, one that we hear currently all the time, though, relates more to infrastructure and particularly to housing. Is there any reflections you'd like to make on the impact of net migration on housing?
Undoubtedly, the level of net migration affects infrastructure, congestion, housing, service delivery.
Yeah.
Historically, and I must say this is historically, whenever net migration has approached about 250,000, the complaints go up about infrastructure, congestion, housing, service delivery. Whenever net migration in the last 20-odd years has been below 200,000, we start to hear more and more complaints about labour shortages, skill shortages, etc., etc. Industries start to complain hard.
I mean, even the complaint about the congestion and failing infrastructure, we're going to need more workers to go into the construction industry, and we're certainly going to need more workers to go into our healthcare and aged care facilities. And at the moment, that's overwhelmingly coming from migrants. Yeah. So if you cut the migration program, problems that are already there are going to be exacerbated further.
Yes, it's worth reading the most recent reports from Infrastructure Australia, which says, oh, look, there are these massive infrastructure needs. We've got all these massive infrastructure projects going on. The biggest challenge to delivering our infrastructure needs is our lack of trade skills workers.
The policy that had been mooted by apparently Susan Lee, that was apparently going to be announced this week, for the first time was singling out, well, first time in a long time, was singling out particular regions that were going to be banned, or people from those regions would be banned from coming into Australia. Can you talk to us a little bit about the implications of that, and particularly what that would mean for our non-discriminatory policy to date?
Well, it would be the end of our non-discriminatory policy. The policy that was initially when we ended the White Australia policy in 1974, we essentially moved to a non-discriminatory policy. We had the John Howard famous interview in 1988, where Mr. Howard said, we want to slow the rate of migration from Asia. We had Bob Hawke respond in 1989 with a parliamentary motion saying we are committed to a non-discriminatory migration policy. The motion was successful. There was some famous crossing of the floor that went on. And since then, we have rigidly stuck to our non-discriminatory policy approach. Indeed, I can remember discussions within the Department of Immigration where we discussed what would happen if a government abandoned the non-discriminatory policy. How would we manage it? And we discussed that and we said, oh, it's not going to happen. So we
And can it just happen with a stroke of a pen? I mean, a new government coming in, it would just be a change to existing legislation?
No, they would need to change the Migration Act.
Mm-hmm.
They would need to change the Racial Discrimination Act.
So they would be able to come into government at some point in the future, change the acts, just talk about regions within countries, not religions within countries, and then they could basically undo our non-discriminatory the non-discriminatory basis for our immigration policy.
Yes. So the basis, the constitutional basis for the White Australia policy still exists, so we can still do that.
If an incoming government, decided to cut through a combination of numbers of international students coming in and numbers of skilled workers coming in, whether temporary or permanent, they would be likely to get a backlash from whether it's the university sector, who now rely on international students to fund their operations, and from business more generally. There really isn't a way of cutting migration without having these very real, direct and material impacts on critical industry sectors.
Absolutely. One other group that you should include in the complainants is state and territory governments.
Right.
So for 25-26, state and territory governments were vociferous in their complaints about the cutbacks in their allocations from the Commonwealth Government in 25-26, to the extent that the Premier of Western Australia wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister complaining.
And is that to do with trying to boost regional populations, or what exactly?
Yes. It's both regional populations as well as meeting the skill needs of individual states. A really classic example here is the Queensland government. The Queensland government, the new Queensland government, went to the last election saying we will cut back migration to Queensland. And in the first year of that government, they said, we don't want any allocations for our state, for state-sponsored visas, please. Keep them, give them to others. And so the government said, okay, whatever you think. And so they did. And then in 25-26, the Queensland state government said, oh, actually, could we have those back? And the Commonwealth said, oh, that's a problem, so we're going to have to take them back from the other states. Well, that won't be easy. And so they did that, gave them to the Queensland government, who quietly just went about increasing migration to Queensland, whilst all the other state governments complained and said, what are you doing?
So, it's just ludicrous, isn't it, that there's this contradiction, this massive contradiction at the heart of our performative political rhetoric about wanting to be seen to cut migration, which seemingly is a political choice to pander to the right, whilst everybody knows really that you need net overseas migration to maintain at least at current levels, and certainly not to shrink below this sort of 200,000 that you're talking about, for Australia's economy and society to continue to function.
Well, that's true. The biggest contradiction, I think, actually is in regional Australia. Now, regional Australia disproportionately votes for Pauline.
Yeah.
Regional Australia has a median age of 42. Cities Australia combined has a median age of 36. There's a 6-year median age difference. That is not small. That is a big difference. What it really means is that in regional Australia, there are a lot more old people. Yep. Regional Australia more regularly loses young people to the cities. That's been happening for as long as I can remember, and probably before I was alive. That's been happening. And what that does is make regional Australia older and makes it harder for regional Australia to survive economically. As a result, when I was in the Department of Immigration, we had a constant stream of people from regional Australia, industries in regional Australia saying, you've got to help us. We're in dire trouble. You've got to help us get us the skilled migrants we need. You've got to help us get overseas students. You've got to help us get working holiday makers. You've got to do something. And as a result, over the last 30 years, we have developed a plethora of visa mechanisms to help regional Australia. Is Pauline going to take that away?
So do you think all of this is just, bringing Pauline and her political rhetoric, as John Howard tried to do back in the 80s, to the political centre, and it is just migration being used as an ignorant political football that is driving the debate at the moment?
Oh, it's certainly, much of it is politics because no one is talking any sense in this space.
Yeah.
And in particular, I think the government is to blame here because its strategy on immigration is say as little as possible and hope no one notices that you're not saying anything.
Yeah. Rather than explain some of the things that you've been talking about.
Exactly. But the problem, in my view, with that approach is that if you leave a vacuum of information of what you're trying to do, the vacuum gets filled by all sorts of conspiracy theorists, including Pauline.
So, Greg, there is really at the very heart of this so-called policy discussion that we're having, this massive contradiction whereby we continue to need more people, not just to fill our health and aged care employment requirements, but actually to try and get productivity up so that we can bring them into the construction industry to build the houses that we need, all of these sorts of things. We need these people. Business keeps telling us that. And yet we have a sort of sham debate happening at this performative level, which pretends that's not the case.
Yeah, what we're seeing here is a couple of things that have always fit nicely together and in Australian politics, and that's racism and housing. The Liberal Party, foolishly in my view, but go for it, they're chasing One Nation votes because they're worried they're losing them, and so they think that the best way to respond is to be as racist as they are. And good luck to them. That means they will continue to be a rump party, which, I don't see a lot of disappointment in that occurring. But really what is also going on is we know that the government is looking at things like the capital gains tax discount, changing that, getting rid of that, and they're going to be pushing that as this is a way to actually make housing more affordable. Whereas the Liberal Party wants to keep that, and certainly Tim Wilson has made it very clear he's going to fight that and calling it a housing tax, which is quite funny, but what the hell? And what they want to do is to blame migrants for housing and say this is actually about housing. This is about rent prices, the fact that you can't get a home, and the fact that your commute takes an hour or whatever, and you can't get to see anyone because there's lines of people and all this. So it's going to be a lot of that, a lot of let's find someone easy to blame rather than admit that what's really to blame is we've had 25 years of the richest 10% getting 80% of this massive benefit of a tax break, and has not just given them stonks of cash, has also distorted the housing market out of all hell. And, no one's kids can afford a home. No one's parents can afford a
Mm.
home. But hey, it's all the fault of migrants. We had the lie about Chinese investors owning whatever it was, 65% of Sydney's housing or things like that. Um, it's all pretty ripe for abuse and misleading because it fits into people's racist perceptions, which unfortunately Australia has a very long history of. I mean, I can remember writing about this for Guardian. It was definitely before the pandemic, 2018 or so, where there was a few economics blogs around the traps who were sort of writing about migration, suggesting that would be a way to solve certain things. And I was really sort of going, guys, you realize this is just feeding where we know where this ends up, and it's going to end up with racism and a total shit show. And I got a lot of pushback saying, "Oh, you're terrible," and it's like, well, here we are.
Yeah.
It was no shock. So it unfortunately is that and it's always even kind of annoying us even talking about it because you think, oh God, are we feeding into it? But look, I think these things always need to be slapped down, but also to make sure that we don't just fact check them, but really point out, look, this is a game that they are playing to avoid forcing or to ensure that rich people, not you and me, can keep making out like bandits and screwing over everyone in the process.
Mm. And Jana,
Yep. I feel like even without numbers and economic data, just a logical Occam's razor approach to this should make you realize that it's probably not the people without any power in our society that are meaning millennials and below can't afford houses anymore. It's quite clearly the economic masters of the world we live in. I don't understand why this is so I suppose it's because I'm not a frothing racist, but I don't find this argument even slightly convincing. It's a strange one.
look, it does seem to
Yeah,
be a
I mean, I can grasp the sorry,
no,
Joe.
no,
I
you go.
can grasp things like, um, lack of services or, congestion. That at least kind of makes sense because yeah, there's more people. But when I think about housing prices, I'm like, one, we during 21 and 22, we had zero migration, like literally zero migration. And what happened to house prices during that period? They exploded out of all proportion. Why? Well, because government policy helped juice demand like nothing else. It's got nothing to do with migration. It's got all to do with where the incentives are in our tax system, and they're all towards juicing up house prices.
And Jana, it does seem to be the case as well. I mean, as Abel was saying there, like some of the biggest cohorts of the net overseas migration figures that keep being talked about are actually working holiday makers and students who aren't buying the suburban three-bedroom bungalow out in the burbs. So there is deliberate conflation of particular issues that have nothing to do with each other. But there are real victims in all of this, as Dave has alluded to, and it generally is recent migrants who are copping a lot of racism, and then it's people who never get to come here in the first place.
Well, I think it's going back even further than that, there has been a history in Australia of scapegoating migrants for political purpose. It might be around housing at the moment, but ASRC was established 25 years ago at the time of the Tampa, where to win an election there was accusations of children being thrown overboard. And if you want to talk about demonising people, saying that they're throwing their kids overboard is one sure way to do it. And that then has created this fear, this hype around boat arrivals, people seeking asylum, refugees, and that has continued. So I think that there's just another chapter in people seeking asylum, refugees, and now migrants being demonised. And we talk about recent arrivals. I mean, we're working with people at the ASRC who arrived here 13, 14 years ago seeking asylum. They still don't have the right to work. They still don't have any permanency. Our whole migration system, yes, it needs to be looked at and be reformed, but to be fairer, not in the ways that, the government, the opposition, and other political leaders are talking about it at the moment. The shutting the door, Tony Abbott talking about bringing back White Australia policy. I just heard Jane Hume also being interviewed saying that it's recent arrivals who are leading to challenges to social cohesion. This is all just for political purposes. It's absolutely about politics. Anytime, I've been at ASRC for 16 years, anytime any party was getting a little bit thumped in the polls, we would know the next day there'd be something about crime and migrants, something about housing and migrants on the front pages of the paper, because it's just scapegoating, blaming migrants, making people afraid of the other, and only some of the other, generally migrants who are people of colour as the other, because it's racist as well, and fear-mongering. So we've got a long history of doing this in Australia, and it has very real consequences. I mean, we just have seen that even, in the last weeks there's been an increase in reports of Islamophobia, people who are in hijabs who are afraid to go out. It has very, very real consequences, and it's about politics. I have argued till I'm blue in the face about the economics of it. I mean, we're spending $14 billion over the last decade on offshore processing. You want to save some money? Shut down offshore processing. People have died there. Kids have been harmed. So it's not economics. The humanity argument, I think we've won. It's absolutely all about politics.
Mm.
The Trump administration has asked its allies or vassal states, however you want to describe them, to send immigrant-related crime data back to Washington. It's reported in the Conversation a few months ago. I'm wondering what this narrative push that we are all experiencing now, how tied to the US and Trump you think? I'm asking for some speculation at this point, but I'm wondering how related you think this is, Greg and Jana.
Well, I think as Jana pointed out, when you've got Tony Abbott saying, "Oh, I liked our migration policy in the 1950s and 60s," and it's like that was literally White Australia policy, and that was a policy where you had people from Italy and Greece being referred to as new Australians, and or if you're polite, and refos if you weren't. It's like the yeah, barely having to scratch them anymore before it's revealed that it's all about white supremacy rather than even anything about economics. It's almost like the getting to the point where they realize actually our economic arguments are pretty crap. When you've even got the Reserve Bank coming out last year, as they did, and point out, foreign students don't affect rents at all, and they don't have any impact on inflation because, well, they're students. They don't actually have much money, but let's rely on good old Australian values, people who think like us, and that us is white people. And it's a pretty disgusting point. I think there's not a surprise that we've seen the ALP go hard on this ISIS brides thing, because that kind of gives them cover then on other immigration matters. They can make it look like, oh, see, we're tough on our borders, and so they would prefer to have the fight over those 11 women, treat them as the scapegoats rather than perhaps a broader fight. But underneath it all is just this hideous white supremacy, which certainly I think Trump has given voice to, and a belief that, oh, we can say this out loud now? Oh, good. Let's go for it.
And to the
But
point
they're all
about
just watching and copying each other. I think in particular, the US, the UK, and Australia, like, the US copies us, we copy them in the UK. Like we've exported some of our worst refugee and asylum policies to
Absolutely.
other countries, and I think a lot of things are being tested at the moment. With we discussed Susan Lay's apparent leak of her immigration policy that was looking to ban people from 13 countries coming to Australia. Well, Labor actually passed a law last year that made that possible. So when we're saying, oh, would never bring in Trump-style politics, we already have. I mean, you had a look at the police response to the Herzog protests. That was
Mhm.
ICE-like behaviour. So I think, and then we're copying. We look at the UK. They had their Rwanda deal, trying to ship off
yeah.
refugees to Rwanda. They got that from Australia. We have also, in Australia, who's running the detention facilities offshore? We've contracted MTC, a prison operator, where there are allegations of abuse and mistreatment. So we're all copying each other, and the world leaders are, and they're looking at each other and testing things and saying, let's actually make the worst possible statement, see if there's outrage, and if there's not, we'll just put that in place. So I
Mhm.
think it is really dangerous territory at the moment, Dave, and your question about, what's happening in the US, are we copying it? There's this ping pong between Australia, US, and the UK of copying the worst of the worst in terms of racism and
Mm.
division, rather than bringing together a time of unity, because, it's hard not to despair. We've also got to see this as an opportunity of leading with our values, the good values in Australia, the values that if someone's bushfire it hits a house, you go and help them. If there are floods, you go and help them. If people are fleeing from things in Australia, we're actually really amazing. We've got this great welcoming sense, this great sense of a fair go. We just need to extend that to more people and focus on that rather than the Australian values that Angus Taylor is talking about. But I'm still really confused
As
with
to
what
what
they
they
are.
are.
They
J-
never define them because they are white supremacy and
So,
capitalism.
Jana, can I just pick up on the point that you made there about the Albanese government having passed what is essentially a bill that gave permission for uh, for discrimination within our migration system? Because when this now orphaned, it seems, policy of Susan Lee's was leaked, there was a lot of commentary that was saying, well, this would be the return of a discriminatory system, which we have not had since the White Australia policy. And it very much did single out 37 regions in 13 countries, all of which are majority non-white countries. So to your point about white supremacy. But can you just explain a little bit about what that bill was that the Albanese government passed that sort of gives permission for this kind of thing?
Yeah, so they passed 3 bills as a package. It was a way to get the coalition to support it, so it was a coalition support. One of the things was an entry ban. So the Minister of Home Affairs could nominate countries where there is then an entry ban on people coming from those countries. So, for example, a lot is being talked about with Iran, because at the moment Australia won't return anyone to Iran involuntarily. They have to voluntarily go. So it was a way of saying we're actually just going to use this tool as coercion, as a way of negotiating with the Iranian government. There were talks of possibly Afghanistan as well as another country. But we did pass a law, or the Liberals, Nationals and Labor passed a law that allows an entry ban on any country that could be nominated at a certain time. It also brought in a whole other range of things, such as banning and confiscating mobile phones in detention. It also brought in
Oh, I love
greater
that, yeah.
powers, visa cancellation powers. I think another thing that isn't acknowledged enough is there are so many powers that sit with the Minister of Home Affairs to be able to cancel people's visas, and they were even strengthened more recently with the hate speech bill, which is probably a whole other topic. But those powers were Labor's powers that were passed with the support of the coalition. So anyone who's jumping up and down about what was in those leaked immigration, banning people, saying it's discriminatory, should be jumping up and down about the laws that Labor have passed, because those powers exist. They now exist.
They haven't been used as yet. They're sort of sitting on the books malevolently, waiting for the first exercise of such powers.
That's right. They haven't been used as yet. But you've always got to think, when you're making laws, you've got to think about how they could be used. And another thing is not only sort of what Labor has done, and what they're doing it to, because it's to migrants, new arrivals, people seeking asylum and refugees, but how they've done it. There was no consultation. They rushed these laws through. This is not how you make good policy. It's not how a democracy should operate. People will be able to be consulted, able to inform. You had the Law Council who came out against it. You had the UN who came out against it. You even had the Human Rights Commissioner have to come out and say, some of the reasons you're asking for additional powers, you're using me as an excuse. That's actually not what I meant. So it's what they're doing, it's how they're doing it, and it's who they're doing it to that really should concern everyone, because you can start stripping rights away from some people. When will it stop?
Yeah.
I mean, it probably won't. We know how authoritarian creep happens. It's very well documented in history. Just on your point on the lack of debate, this is becoming a modus operandi for this government. There are so many very controversial bills, very controversial contracts with Parlantir, etc., signed without any sort of consultation, any sort of debate. The old Friday special, 4:30, get it, the journalists have gone home. It really shows a disdain for the democratic processes from the Albanese government. I can't read it any other way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we now know things happen on a Friday afternoon, like, the secret deal to be able to deport people for billions of dollars to Nauru was, I think it was a 17-word press release uploaded onto the Department of Home Affairs on a Friday evening. We're also, talking about with the hate speech laws that when the bill with the gun laws was sort of separated, people were given hours to look at it before it was passed. Like, you cannot make good laws without robust conversations. Like, we would welcome the debate. People welcome a debate, but you can't rush through things that have such consequences. And in the area that I work in, those consequences are life or death. If you get returned home to a country where you're facing persecution, you could be killed. If you're on visas and there are changes to visas and you get it cancelled, you're separated from your family. It's not just sort of numbers and big debates, but it's real life consequences to people in our community.
And we saw here in Canberra this week, we finally had a good arrest from for the hate speech laws, where a pub owner got arrested and because he had posters of Trump and his goons satirically done up like members of the Nazi, Hitler and Goebbels and so forth. It was just basically a bit of
Well, Dave, you
satirical
you
art, and
spoke
that was
to
taken down as hate
you,
speech.
you spoke to the bar
Yeah,
owner.
I spoke to
Yeah.
I did. I spoke to David Howe just before, in fact, and he was visited by the AFP. They received an anonymous complaint
Ah,
about the satirical art. I've got the photos of the art. It's just it's a classist fascist
yeah,
satire with
yeah.
Netanyahu, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, JD Vance. The owner was he was certain it was the Netanyahu poster that was the one that got the complaint.
100%.
The cops left. They had to cancel a gig. A Melbourne band that was traveling up there ended up playing a house party instead of at the pub. That proves that rock and roll cannot be killed. I think that's just an important point to slip in there. And he's since put the posters back up, but he was yeah, the owner was shaken by grotesque authority and overreach that I think everyone in the Palestinian community that I've been speaking to has warned that these hate speech laws would be used specifically to target their movement, and I think we're just seeing that abundantly in the evidence as it's playing out
Mm.
this week.
Yeah,
Yeah, because
and
they've
And
added
oh, sorry.
nationality for the
Yeah,
first time as to something the hate speech laws target, adding nationality. And, we, especially for people seeking asylum, you flee because you're being oppressed by a nation state, for example. That's why you're recognised as a refugee. You arrive in Australia, you criticise that same nation state that has oppressed you, and you can get your visa cancelled, then put into detention. We absolutely support greater anti-vilification laws, but it's got to be for everyone. It can't be just only applied to a select few, and it's really dangerous precedents that are being set.
Here's a question for people that understand lawmaking. Is there a mechanical reason, a practical reason why you can't target legislation specifically at racism as a blanket term? Why does it need to be siloed into anti-Semitism specifically, or why can't it just be anti-racism laws?
well, I mean, we do have the Racial Discrimination Act that does that very thing. It's just that, yeah, these and what we've seen with these laws, if I recall correctly, is in the actual the wording of the actual act, they don't specify specific anti-Semitism, but what they'll do is in the notes they'll give an example, and the example is an anti-Semitic thing, and the explanatory memorandum will refer to an anti-Semitic thing, and that's how I think they get around that, because obviously if they were to just say one thing, that does open up. I would suggest, and this is something to ask Anne Toomey, sort of legal repercussions of being able to challenge it. So they tried to do it sneakily, but it was so obvious from the legislation, reading the bill, and you saw a note giving an example of what this thing would refer to, and it was anti-Semitism. And like, okay, this is a bit too obvious. And just another point going into what you've been saying about these Friday specials and everything, and also the protest laws, it also very much applies to things like um, coal and gas and protesting against climate change. We see the government approving new coal mines, that getting released late on Fridays. And we know that these protest laws have been used very much against people campaigning against climate change, protesting at Santos's offices in Adelaide. And we saw all the laws that came in New South Wales against blockages. Those laws then also can get applied to protesting against Israel and genocide. You know, it's just a wonderful amalgam for the forces of the status quo, in a sense, the powerful, to use these laws in both those ways.
Mm. Well, that's a very cheery note for us, perhaps, to conclude that conversation on. The powers that be, they are out to maintain their power at all costs. Speaking of, we did see, though, some accountability coming into effect, not in the US, of course, but in the UK, as we woke to the news on Friday morning that former Prince Andrew, now Mr. Mountbatten Windsor, had been arrested for misuse of, what was the actual phrase? It's misuse of public power, and not to do with the trafficking of women. This is much more to do with his forwarding on of confidential government information when he was a trade envoy. Misconduct in public office is the name of the particular charge. So we are starting to see a small but growing list of some people, men and women, who have had repercussions for their involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. Not, though, in the US at the moment, Dave. That still seems to be the president just kicking on.
Yeah, and in fact, I'd hypothetical, but if this was a less disgraced, more senior royal that did the exact same things, would we see this treatment? I do wonder if Andrew is tangential enough, disliked enough, dorky enough to just be the fall guy for this collective oligarchical shit show.
Yeah. Look, it's
Yeah, and my
go.
my thinking as well is a bit on that. I don't think they'll probably get him on the essentially insider trading. That's basically what they're going after. But I think, from what I can understand, the process with English and British law is to actually officially question someone, they do need to be arrested. And given he was there for 10 hours, I wonder if a few other topics of interest were asked at the same time, because they probably have enough sort of a case to at least sort of have suspicion of illegal acts on this. You know, seem to be giving them a heads up on things that could affect markets. Now, whether that actually comes to anything, but
Yeah.
it might be a case of this helps us start asking about other things, and who knows. But obviously in America, where the main game is, things still, well, Donald Trump told us he's been cleared, he's fine. So I'm
And Pam
quite
Bondi's
happy we can rest now.
Pam Bundy's told us that the Dow is at over 50,000, so we shouldn't care about this at all whatsoever.
all
The
going
numbers are
to-
going up. Don't
Yeah.
worry.
We're just going to move on now. America has had enough of the Epstein files, and I think I'm right in saying that the only political figure who has suffered repercussions out of America was Alex Acosta, who did the original sweetheart deal in Florida that saw Epstein get, a bit of an ankle bracelet and then normal life continuing to be led most of the time. Still, that is something that we will keep our eyes on. We have come to the end of another show of the Sunday Shot. Before we go, as ever, I will ask if there is any top tips that our panelists or Dave, our co-host, would like to mention. Greg, is there something you're keeping your eye on for the week ahead, or that has particularly struck you for the week we've had?
Look, very boring. The week past, we had some good unemployment figures come out, 4.1%. I know people have a lot of problems with unemployment figures, but as a general rule, low unemployment is better than higher unemployment, except if you are in the media, in which case you have to report low unemployment as meaning, the Reserve Bank is going to raise interest rates again.
Yeah.
I wrote a column for Guardian. I've also on my Substack and also for The Point, kind of called bullshit on that. Low unemployment's fine. We've got wage growth under control. It's 3.4%, perfectly good with inflation under 3%. But we are going to get some more inflation figures out on Wednesday, so we're going to get yet another series of what's going to happen with interest rates, because that's apparently the only topic that matters in Australian economic coverage, and unfortunately, I'm right in the goddamn center of all of that.
It is kind of incredible because
Make poor choices, Greg.
Yeah,
I do too.
I remember when I was growing up, like, low unemployment was a good thing. If we got more people in work, that was considered to be a boon for the economy. But now it seems low unemployment is immediately pushed to one side, and it is, as you say, always and only about its impact on interest rates. So, and in inflation and then interest rates. So, it doesn't matter if more people are working and can afford to pay their rent. Jana, any top
And
tips?
let me tell you, there's a lot more people working than that have got a mortgage. So
Yeah, exactly.
keep
But
your eye on the
we've
ball
forgotten
on that.
about. Jana, any top tips from you?
Yeah, my top tip, something that, to help take my mind off everything. I'm a big football fan, round football, Italian background.
Oh, okay.
Champions League this week. The second games are coming up. Inter Milan is my team. They had a pretty brutal beating in Norway. But another reason to watch out for the football is there's also been a whole lot of discussions about racism in football this week, in particular with the Real Madrid player, and it'll be just interesting to see how football as a big global phenomenon deals with that. There should be a zero tolerance, but so watching what happens in football this week, not only for love of the game, but also how they deal with racism.
And I think that
Good one.
the round ball competition will have something to deal with as well when it comes to the World Cup this year, and whether or not fans are actually going to stay away, particularly from those games in the US. Will Trump kill the World Cup despite his fake peace award from FIFA? Dave, any top tip from you?
All fans are allowed in the country to cheer on their teams.
Well, that's right. People, even those who may try and
their
get
entry
in,
plan as well.
may not make it in.
Yeah.
Dave, your top tip.
Yeah, Drew Pavlu didn't get into the American. That wasn't my top tip. It just came to my mind, and it is, kind of funny. I guess as we're documenting all this fascist buggery, it's come to my attention from a number of sources that visa officers inside the Department of Home Affairs are being given anti-Semitism training, not racism training, not unconscious bias training, anti-Semitism training, which I just think is kind of chilling, given we know the cudgel that is in this country. So I just thought I'd mention that because I've not seen it reported anywhere.
No, I haven't seen it reported anywhere. So you've got that from your people on the inside, and it has been kept pretty quiet. I wonder if people have had to sign confidentiality agreements about it as well. NDAs in the Home Affairs Office. We have come to the end of another show. Thank you to Jana for making her debut with us. Greg, it's good to have you back. As ever, for our viewers who have not yet subscribed to our channel, please do, because we want to get to that 10,000 target before the financial year is out. There we go. I've put a target out there for us to try and reach as well. If you can, give us some money. We can keep going. That'd be great. But otherwise, have an excellent week, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again next week.